Good morning. Morning. It is wonderful to be here this morning. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector here at All Saints Church. Would you pray with me, please? God dwells in you. Let us pray. Holy and loving God, giver of all good gifts, ignite our imaginations and passions. Help us be transformed by your presence in this place and by how we can be present to one another. Help us to be shaped more and more into your beloved community given for the life of the world. Help us to be surprised by joy and enlightened by compassion. And all this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. At all times we put our faith into action at All Saints Church, and each week we pick one or two things to give kind of laser beam focus to that and act as a whole. This week we're asking everyone to sign a petition to Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, and BlackRock, demanding that they divest from private detention companies and to stop giving them loans. We're particularly strongly opposed to private immigrant detention centers that are indefinitely detaining immigrants. In addition to signing that, would really encourage each one of us, as we have mutual funds. The whole nature of mutual funds is that we may not know what it is that we're investing in until we actually take a look. So take a look. If you have investment in mutual funds in a portfolio, take a look at that. BlackRock is one of the largest, if not the largest, investment firms in this country that invest mutual funds, and they are one of the largest investors in the three primary organizations that run for-profit prisons. So it may be something that you're investing in without knowing it. So take this opportunity, in addition to signing the petition at the action table, to look into, if you are someone who does have investments, look into those investments and be clear about what you're investing in and making sure it's something that reflects your values. And speaking of investing in things that reflect your values, we're grateful for your investing financially in All Saints Church and your gifts of generosity that continue along with the grace of God and the amazing work that we all do together to keep this community thriving. If you have pledged for 2018, we're incredibly grateful for that. It is absolutely not too late to do that. You can see me, you can see Jim LaDuha, you can see other members of the staff for a pledge card. We are thrilled to have in our forum today the Reverend Yolanda Norton. Yolanda is a professor, assistant professor of Old Testament and the H. Eugene Farlow Chair of Black Church Studies at San Francisco Theological Seminary. She is a brilliant scholar and theologian. She has become known recently because she started teaching a class called Beyonce and the Hebrew Bible. And out of that class, there was worship, a liturgy emerged from that. And she is here to talk with us about the politics of Beyonce, the Beyonce Mass, and Black Girl Magic. And I'm going to sit down at this point and introduce to you Reverend Yolanda Norton.
Yeah, still good morning. I am not a token. I'm a treasure. I'm not the exception. I am the rule. Black girl magic is not an anomaly. It's an actuality. And just because you don't see me doesn't mean that I cease to exist. Why won't you see me? I am. This is the philosophy that drives so much of what happens with Beyonce, the Beyonce Mass, and Black Girl Magic. Before I start to tell the story of this Beyonce Mass, I want to lay a little foundation. So let's talk a little bit, first and foremost, about this concept of womanist and womanism. Alice Walker, in her book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, placed in it a 4-part definition of the term womanist. What she is doing in that moment is culling a definition for Black women about our identity and establishing a movement that is distinct from the feminist movement. So the question that my students often ask on the first day of class, never again, but often on the first day of class, why do we need a movement, a womanist movement that is separate from a feminist movement? Here's why. The feminist movement has never cared about black girls and black women, right? From its genesis, it was a movement that ignored our realities. You don't believe me? The first two policy agendas for the feminist movement were the right to work and the right to vote. Black women have always worked, right? So when white women decide that they want to go to work, they actually make life harder for black women. Black women are working as domestics in white homes as white women don't go to work. So when white women go to work, black women have to work more hours, and it keeps them farther away from their own families, right? So this movement never takes into account the harsh realities that it creates for black women. So that's the first example. The second example I give is this right to vote. When white women get the right to vote, black women don't have the right to vote. Our intersectional reality means that until white women and black men have the right to vote, we got nothing. We live at the crossroads of oppression, right? So because the feminist movement never makes room for our realities, a new movement needs to be formed that sees us for all that we are, right? So Alice Walker, who starts as a black feminist and then decides that this movement doesn't make room for us, develops this four-part definition. The first part of the definition suggests, she says, womanist, this should say womanish, right? It's a black folk expression of mothers to female children. You act in womanish, i.e. you act in grown, right? So it's usually referring to what you see in little black girls, that boldness, the audacity that the world often tries to beat out of them, right? That attitude, that spunk that is black girls who are forced to be grown and live into their grown reality. She talks about willful behavior. Black women is responsible and in charge and unafraid. Womanist also is a woman who loves other women, either sexually or non-sexually, appreciates and prefers women's cultures, women's emotional flexibility. And I love this part. A womanist values tears as a natural counterbalance of laughter, right? Our tears, just like our laughter, are the way that we bear testimony to our reality. It is one of the most dangerous things that the world has done to black women is to teach us that because we have to be strong all the time, that strong means that our emotions have to be in check, right? Because what the world teaches us is that if we're too angry, then we're an angry black woman. If we cry too much, then we're overly emotional. My response to this idea that I'm an angry black woman, when people tell me I'm an angry black woman, my response is thank you. I didn't become angry out of anywhere. It didn't just appear out of the ether. I'm angry for a reason, and I own it. I'm not afraid of it just because it makes people nervous. I hope it makes it nervous. You make me angry, I'm gonna make you nervous. There we go. So this idea that we can live into the fullness of our strength, we don't have to be afraid to say what's on our minds. We are not going to bear the emotional brunt of the ways that this world tries to harm us and ignore us and act like we are unaffected by it, right? So the womanist loves to live into all of these expressions. This second piece right here becomes really important, right? I want you to hold on to this because it becomes important for when we talk about the Beyonce Mass. A womanist is committed to survival and the wholeness of an entire people, both male and female. Hold that in your mind. A womanist is not a separatist, except and this is important, periodically when it is necessary for our health, right? So as Black women, we are constantly thrust into public space, and that public space, because it is not intended for us, does harm to us physically, emotionally, and psychologically. So at times, we have to retreat into our own space so that we can survive all the things that the world is trying to do to us. So if you listen to Lynn Whitfield, who is a womanist scholar out of Drew University, she's written a wonderful book called Womanist Hospitality. And what she talks about in Womanist Hospitality is these secret womanist sister circles, the ways in which Black women inherently find space that don't nobody know about, and we go off and we tell our story, because oftentimes when we tell it in public space, a couple things happen. People either try to steal it or they abuse it, right? So we go off and we tell our stories off to the side. And so she posits this question in Womanist Hospitality. What is it that people who are not Black women, what is it that white people and Black men can do to assist in the womanist endeavor to be hospitable? And her answer is simple: leave us alone. When we go away, leave us alone. Because it's the way that we find health, right? We are constantly trying to care for all people. So when we go away, we do it for our own health. Third part of Alice Walker's definition, and I'm putting this in the order that Alice Walker puts it, but I'm gonna say this is the culminating piece of the definition. Walker says, a womanist loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folks, loves herself, and does it all regardless, right? So this is the culminating piece. I'm gonna come back to that. And then she finally says, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. Right? So Stacey Floyd Thomas has a book called A Deeper Shade of Purple. And that's the way that the womanist movement articulates itself again, over and against feminists. It is a deeper shade of the movement. And so those of you who saw me wearing my robe today, you will usually see me in some kind of vestment that has purple in it. It's my womanist vestments. And I think it draws us to this point that Alice Walker puts in The Color Purple. Shug and Celie are walking through the fields, and Shug says to Celie, I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and you don't notice it. People think pleasing God is all God cares about, but any fool living in the world can see God always trying to please us back. Right? I love this phrase because Black women are purple. I think it pisses God off when you walk by Black women and you do not see us. We are a manifestation in all of our shapes and our colors, our beauty and our glory, our strength and our magnificence. Our Black girl magic is God showing something in the world, right? If you don't believe me, look at what's happening in the world, right? So what I've said about the Beyonce mass is that Beyonce is not an anomaly, right? I had a reporter who, I was doing an interview with this reporter, and I won't name the reporter, but the reporter says to me, I don't understand how Beyonce is a representation of Black women. Doesn't her money and her success preclude her from being a representation of Black women? I said, what world do you live in, right? Black women have been doing what Beyonce is doing for generations. Just because you don't see us doesn't mean we're not there, right? Black women have been changing the game. Look at what happened in Alabama, right? The political landscape shifted because Black women got sick and tired of being sick and tired. So Beyonce's not unique. I mean, she is unique in the way that every black woman is unique. And I don't want us to ignore Beyonce because then we commit the same crime against her that we commit against every black woman every day, right? I don't want us to ignore her and all the exceptional things that she does, but I want us to see every black woman as changing the paradigm. So I think it pisses God off when we walk past black women and we don't see them. So this is the 4-part definition of Alice Walker. And it becomes important to name this definition because the more that I've done this work, the more that I realize that nobody knows what a womanist is, that this is the kind of failure, not just of the movement, but of public discourse, that people don't know what a womanist is. I was slightly agitated because all these reporters who kept talking about me in the Beyonce mask kept calling me a feminist, and it was like, I didn't know what to do. I am not a feminist, right? Like, what were you looking at? You weren't looking at my bio. You weren't looking at what I said, so I'm not a feminist. I reject that term for me. Whoever wants to own it, that's fine. I reject it for myself because I don't think that it acknowledges my space at the intersections of race, class, and gender. So keeping that definition in mind, Stacey Floyd Thomas, who's a womanist ethicist at Vanderbilt University, wrote this wonderful book called Mining the Motherlode. And Dr. Floyd Thomas really felt that it was important to create a methodology by which we analyze womanist work, right? So she says there are 4 methodological pieces to the womanist agenda. Traditional communalism, right? So all these things are embodied in the definition. Traditionalist communalism, meaning black women are about community and the people, right? Redemptive self-love, this idea that we love on ourselves and heal ourselves. We redeem ourselves when the world won't do it, right? So and we do it for one another. Radical subjectivity, so the ways in which we work within the systems that are created to change the system without people understanding, because they don't acknowledge our power, they don't understand what we're doing until it's too late. We've already changed it, right? And critical engagement, the idea that the way that we do this work synthesizes across a variety of spectrum, right? So that we are able to, as any kind of scholar, pull together material from all pieces of life. This is the work that Emily Towns, another womanist ethicist, says happens at the rim bones of nothingness. So what Dr. Dean Towns says is that black scholarship, but womanist scholarship in particular, lives in this very thin space. And that good black womanist scholarship can engage the likes of Wellhausen and Foucault and all of these scholars that you don't know and don't want to know. But it can do it while simultaneously understanding that the wisdom of our grandmothers and grandfathers, our ancestors, is wisdom that is worthy of scholarship and engagement, and that you don't abandon one for the other. Katie Cannon, who recently passed, tells the story of being in her PhD program, and she kept trying to write these scholarly papers, and she was writing these very erudite, well thought out scholarly papers, and her doctoral mentor kept sending the papers back to be rewritten. And she said, well, I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And her mentor said, no, you're not. You're parroting what every other white man in the field can do. Your stake in this movement, in theological education, is to learn to tell the stories of your people and push them into the canon. As black women, what we do is change the canon, so it's not just dead old white men who determine what theology is. So now, as a biblical scholar, I got a lot of pushback, right? Why are you, as a biblical scholar, worried about the church? Why are you, as a biblical scholar, preaching? Why are you, as a biblical scholar, worried about worship? As if this work that we do as biblical scholars is self-evident. It doesn't need to go anywhere, and it doesn't need to do anything, and it doesn't need to live with people. And that is antithetical to the womanist reality, right? Every work that I do has to live with people. Even if the people don't want to live with me, I'm gonna make them. So with all of that in mind, we kind of come to this Beyonce Mass moment. So I titled this lecture, I Am. And the I Am comes from a lot of different places. The first place it comes from is Exodus 3, right? But Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelite, I am has sent me to you. Okay, this idea of I am. Any good Hebrew Bible scholar will tell you that the I am who I am can also be translated, and I think maybe should more accurately be translated, I am who I will be. Right? And so it's a statement from God that God is evolving alongside of the people. What you need is what I will be. It's not just that God is what we need in the moment. God is whatever you need in that moment, whatever moment you're in. And because time and space and place changes, that's how God manifests God's self. That's what happens in the wilderness. As they encounter thirst, God becomes water in a rock, right? As they encounter heat, God is a cloud. As they encounter darkness, God is a fire. God becomes these things. I am who I will be. I thought about this concept, and I thought about it in the context of a Beyonce album. Beyonce has an album called I Am Sasha Fierce. She says, literally, it's I am ... Sasha Fierce. This I Am Sasha Fierce came at a moment of critical dissonance for her. Because she was at a point in her career where I think she wanted to be a little bit more assertive in her music, and she didn't feel comfortable. So she goes on the Today Show, and people were like, who is Sasha Fierce? And she's like, well, like the nice Beyonce that you guys are all used to, that's Beyonce. But this other Beyonce is Sasha Fierce. So when I need to be my performative self, I become Sasha Fierce. In retrospect, so she does this when she's in her early 20s, which means I'm in my early 20s, and I'm like, yes, Beyonce, thank you. In retrospect, I realized, as I've grown up, she was becoming. She was afraid to be her full self as a black woman, so she created an alter ego. Now, if anybody listens to the last 3 albums that Beyonce put out, she's not calling herself Sasha Fierce. She is Beyonce, and she is full Beyonce black woman. She is living into her assertive, articulate identity, and she's not afraid of what people say. And the fascinating thing is the more that people try to pigeonhole her, the more she walks in her black female identity, right? The more uncomfortable people become, the more she pushes the envelope. The best moment, so now you would be surprised to know, I know, I go to a lot of Beyonce concerts. I know, you're shocked. So I was in Dallas, and I was at a Beyonce concert, and I saw the most fascinating thing happen. So we're at the Beyonce concert, and it's me and one of my best friends from high school, another young black woman, and everybody's standing and everybody's dancing, and we're on a row full of, everybody else in our row is white and female. And everybody's dancing, it's single ladies and whatever, and then Formation comes on. Everybody on our row sits down. So me and Fatima get up and start dancing. We're like, oh, right, you don't know what to do with this song. We know exactly what to do to this song. And maybe we're gonna do a little bit more because it's gonna make you uncomfortable. That's great, right? So all of a sudden, Beyonce becomes something that people can't quite get their hands on, right? So I'm gonna play this Saturday Night Live clip. Some of you have seen it, some of you haven't. I love it. I play it the first day of class in Beyonce in the Hebrew Bible. So all of this becomes important because when we got to the Beyonce Mass, I teach this class on Beyonce in the Hebrew Bible, and like I said, I played it the first day of class, and you could see most of my students who are white being like, uh-oh, this class is not going to be about what I thought it was going to be about. And, a lot of my white students really named that they had to come to class every week and feel uncomfortable, and eventually they learned to be okay with it. And I pushed back because I thought, well, yeah, you come to class and be uncomfortable. That's how people of color exist in theological education every day. It's your turn. It's okay. You'll survive. We do. You're all right. And so we started to create this Beyonce Mass, right? This worship service in class, which we did at SFTS. Then one of my students, Sam Lundquist, was interning at Grace Cathedral, and they have this midweek service, and he says, can we take what we did on campus and move it to Grace Cathedral? They have a midweek service, 50 to 100 people. We just need to maybe shift some things around. Were there things that you didn't like? There were things that I didn't really feel like worked as well as I wanted them to work in the first service, so I changed some of the readings. I had to write some new liturgy for communion because we didn't do that on campus. And can you preach? Great. 50 to 100 people. You want me to say that again? 50 to 100 people. That's what I was promised. That's what I agreed to. That was what was going to happen. So and I was very clear, and my students were very clear, that this was a service about Black women, right? Beyonce in the Hebrew Bible, Beyonce Mass, Beyonce's Black, Beyonce's a woman. This is a service about Black women. Now, as I'm teaching my students, one of the things I'm saying to them is, if you look at the 4-part definition of a womanist, it says, womanist loves music, loves to dance, right? For me, the culmination of womanist is that we love music and we love to dance. That is how we express all of those other things that are encapsulated in the rest of that definition. That's the penultimate moment. So of course, a worship service that includes all of these aspects and talks about them as a part of how God has created us, duh, right? 2 weeks before, 50 to 100 people became 400 people. And that was before class on a Tuesday. I closed my laptop to teach my class, Beyonce in the Hebrew Bible, and I opened my laptop at the end of class, and I got 3 emails from reporters who want to talk to me about the Beyonce Mass. And I look up and I just say Sam's name. Sam darts out of the classroom because he knows, like, this. And so 400 people became 600 people, we had more than 1,000 people on a Wednesday night at a worship service in San Francisco that is like the least church-oriented city in the country. So what I learned from this is, one, people are hungry for something different, and the church is so stuck on doing the same thing that people aren't seeing their needs being met, right? I learned from this that Black women being Black women produces results, right? That when we create a worship service that is about us and names our realities, it does exactly what Alice Walker says it will do. It will be for the uplifting of all people. Those are the good things I learned. The bad things I learned was that people were really quick to want to erase the fact that this was a service about Black women, right? It very quickly became an all lives matter moment, right? You can't say Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. Duh, but we would like to point out for you something that you've forgotten, right? Black Lives Matter is included in that. Thank you, right? Like, yes, there are people who can be fed and nourished by what happens in the Beyonce Mass. That's the point. And Black women are created in the image of God, and it's about time people took notice, right? So every time I've talked about this service, and I talk about it as intellectual property, I talk about it as my desire to start and be a part of a movement to acknowledge womanist theology in the public space and acknowledge what Black women are doing, people get real nervous, anxious, and upset. Beyonce's for all people. Yes, and that includes the Black women Because guess what? Beyonce's black, and she's a woman, right? And so there have been, we're in a learning curve, right? So we've done 2 Beyonce masses, and we will do many more. We are beginning. We're not, this wasn't an end point. And we're gonna continue the conversation about how black female spirituality matters for black women, and what that does to change the way that the church thinks about itself, because the church has to change the way that it thinks about itself. There is a reason why I got emails from people who said, I hadn't been to church in 20 years, and I came, and I took communion for the first time in 2 decades, and I found God in that space, and I had dismissed God because I dismissed the church, and now I gotta figure something else out. Right? There's a reason why that happened. There's also a reason why I got emails from people telling me, and I quote, "In the name of Jesus of Nazareth, rot in hell." I think you missed the point of Jesus of Nazareth. I'm not sure, but I think you might have missed the point. There's a reason why these things are happening, because the church is so intent on its litigious nature that we will choke ourselves to death rather than to decide that we don't have the right to limit how God speaks in the world, right? So I know my time is short. I don't want to leave time for questions, but it's the reason. So I would say what we know about Black Girl Magic, what we know about Beyonce Mass, what we know about Beyonce, I think is encapsulated in the way that I started. So I'm gonna end where I began, and this is my story. This is Beyonce's story. This is the story of every black woman. I am not a token. I am a treasure. I am not the exception. I am the rule. Black girl magic is not an anomaly. It is an actuality. And just because you don't see me doesn't mean that I cease to exist. And so now here's the imperative. You've got to ask yourself, why won't you see me? Thank you. So, Mike, how much time do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. So we've got 10 minutes for questions.
They're on? Oh, okay.
Their mics are on. Any questions? Oh, okay.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
My wife and daughter are immigrants from Uganda. We have been in the U.S. together. We're in East Africa the last 7 years, East and Central Africa, and now we've been here in the U.S. for a year and a half. We're headed back to Uganda in a couple months. One of the dynamics that I notice, and I'm wondering if you notice it as well, when we talk about these issues, the people that I see, the purplest purple, are African women, right? So we lived 3 hours away from a ongoing conflict in Congo, where 2,500 women are raped per day, right? We've lost 10 million Congolese since 1996. And the thing that I see in the United States, in the church, in the media, is this desire to wipe out any news about what's happening in Africa. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
So I think it's interesting. I would name the relationship that the U.S. has with Africa, particularly African women, in a similar way that I would name how they experience black women in the U.S., which is that we only have 2 responses: ignore or make them a gimmick or a fetish, right? You either want to acknowledge the exotic aspects or we want to ignore, right? And so anything that's uncomfortable, we are not going to deal with. That's just, if it's not white and it's uncomfortable, we don't want it. And I say that for 2 reasons. I say that because the U.S. has not had any meaningful response about Boko Haram or any other kind of mass genocide or assault against black women in Africa. And While that's true, Kimberly Crenshaw did a large legal study about programs that benefit African Americans, because her work is in intersectionality. So the first thing she did was she researched that there was a lawsuit brought against a motor company, that I won't name, by black women. And the lawsuit failed because the company could prove that they had promoted black men and that they had promoted white women. So like the black women couldn't prove racial discrimination because the black men had been promoted, and they couldn't prove gender discrimination because the white women had been promoted. But the people who lived right in the middle of that were the ones who were getting just screwed and ignored. Yep, right? And so there was that. The next study she did was about federal programs that exist. And what she found was, she found all these programs for black people, but when she looked at them, they were overwhelmingly for black men. And when she looked to find something for black women, she got excited, scoured the books, found one, got super excited, and then realized that it was a program for African women, federal funding for African women. So she asked the question, like, what do you do when all the women are white, the blacks are men, and the black women are not from the US? So it is a problem that the US ignores the realities and the harshness of African women, except for when it's convenient for them to pay attention to African women. But it's a diasporatic problem. It's that black women are black women, whether you're from Africa or the US, and this country wants no part of it.
Yes, I appreciated your talk. I love taking communion from you this morning. And I don't know why, but it chokes me. It just choked me up as you were offering it to me. My question is, if I sit down at a park bench next to you, and I'm an old white guy, and I'm sitting down next to a black woman, and a part of me wants to say, I recognize that you've had to walk many more miles in your moccasins than I have. But I'd like to say something to you. What would be appropriate? I mean, I literally, I feel the same way if I sit down next to a gay man, because it has some of the same feelings to me.
So
my question is, what would it be appropriate to say anything to you that recognizes that, except good day, or I hope the bus gets here pretty soon?
So I would say the hello acknowledges my humanity, but this is just me, I want fewer people talking towards my reality and more people doing something that uplifts my humanity. I get people saying things all the time to me, right? I see you, I acknowledge you, who would let something happen that would deal death to me and turn away. So at this particular, it's just me, at this particular juncture in my life, sure, absolutely, say something. But if you won't do anything, don't say anything, right? So that matters in policy agendas and what ways that people are willing to check their privilege so that I can flourish in this world that has ignored me. Other questions? Over, right here.
You're doing your masses at Grace Cathedral. Do you think the Episcopal Church is
We just did one.
Oh, the one.
The rest of them will be other places.
Okay, so I guess my question is the Episcopal Church uniquely suited to this kind of worship? Is it something that you're trying to take across churches in the city? Sort of how do you think about that when you're thinking about different denominations and sort of the place and the environment for this work?
Yeah, this is not an Episcopal movement. I'm Disciples of Christ clergy. I work at a Presbyterian seminary. I think this movement lives in spite of denominations, not because of, right? I don't think any denomination is well suited to do this work, right? If they were, people would just be coming to church on Sunday, wouldn't they? Right? They wouldn't show up on one Wednesday, right? So this is something that I'm really pushing a lot of different churches to do. And what I have found interesting and I'm fighting against is that oftentimes white churches are quick to want to do it because they want the gimmick of it. And so I'm saying no, because I'm not going to let you make women who look like me a gimmick. And they want people to come to my church. I want numbers, show up, right? And black congregations are afraid of it, right? Because patriarchy is alive and well in the black church, right? So I'm fighting racism on one end and sexism on another end. The church is, no, nothing about the church is suited for this work, and yet I am determined. I've been asked to do it in spaces that are not the church, and I won't do it. I'm determined to make the church deal with me.
Good morning, and thank you so much for being here. My 15-year-old black daughter came to church with me this morning on a day when she wasn't singing in choir, and that's usually the only time I can get her to come, because she thought we were having a Beyonce mass.
Psych!
Right? So then I said, well, honey, let's go to the forum afterwards. She said, is Beyonce going to be singing? I said, I don't think so. My child is at the mall. So my question is, what do we need to do to get a Beyonce mass here? I'm looking at Mike.
We're working on it. We're working on it. I think.
Okay, well, and actually, just to jump in with that, is I just want to make sure that if this is something that we engage the whole thing.
Yeah.
That we don't embody just what you were talking about is,
Right.
let's do this as a gimmick to get numbers in. We do this because of our commitment to centering the lives, voices, and experiences of black women, and having folks like me be able to modulate our power
Right.
to allow that to happen, not just for an hour and a half liturgy,
Right.
but as something that we're going to be about as a community. So
Right. Right.
It's not as simple as, let's do this. Okay, so what does it mean if we do this?
Right.
And that's a much more important question, and that's a conversation that we're having, but it's going to have to be a conversation that we all have.
Right. So I'll say on the front end, never again will I do a Beyonce mass that doesn't include congregational education. So if this church or any church wants a Beyonce mass, you got to be ready to do the work.
I think we're at 11, so can we give Reverend Norton our appreciation again? Thank you so much.